Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at the top story we're tracking for you. In a special televised address to the nation last night, Israel's president called for a compromise to the government's plans to overhaul the judicial system, which has triggered protests across the country. Herzog warned that Israel was on the verge of societal and constitutional collapse. He implored citizens on both sides of the political aisle to refrain from violence.
We are long past being in a political argument. Rather, we are on the brink of constitutional and social collapse.
The president appealed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to seek a compromise with his political opponents and proposed a 5-point agreement.
An agreement can be reached. The President's office is fully committed to the issue and is open at all hours of the day for talks that will advance any cooperation arrangement you choose. From a joint meeting through the establishment of an action team to a committee that will deal with formulating the agreements. Any way you choose, any time you choose, provided that we move to a constructive and sustaining discourse and abandon the deceiving, belittling and nullifying discourse. I appeal to the chairman of the Knesset's Constitution, Law and Justice Committee and appeal to the coalition with a request not to bring the law to the first reading.
The Israeli government is currently advancing a legislation to overhaul the legal system. This legislation would curb the High Court Justice's power to exercise judicial review. It would give the government an automatic majority on the Judicial Selection Committee. It would allow lawmakers to overrule court rulings with a majority and allow government ministers to appoint their own legal advisors. According to the reports, the proposed judicial reforms will be presented in the Knesset today. In a direct comment on the proposed judicial overhaul in Israel, the United States President Joe Biden urged for consensus building. Meanwhile, the proposed reforms by Netanyahu's government have triggered countrywide demonstrations and intense opposition from various quarters of Israeli society. Israeli media is reporting that tens of thousands of workers from private sector companies, law firms, tech startups are planning to join the nationwide civil workers' strike against the government's plans for judicial overhaul. While the government pushed ahead with the reforms, the cabinet has also okayed legislation of 9 West Bank outposts in response to terror attacks in East Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayeh has slammed the approvals, calling it a recipe for an escalation which threatens the Palestinians' very existence. Now, for more on this, we are being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen from Jerusalem. Hello to you, Jody. Now, how do we expect the Netanyahu government to react to the president's speech and suggestions?
Hi, Alison. Well, of course, the president's position in Israel is largely symbolic, and the real power lies with the parliament, with the government, and of course, with the prime minister. President Herzog is very well respected. He was a lawyer himself before he entered politics, and he gave a statement to the nation on Sunday evening in which he suggested that a responsible judiciary is important, but a balance is needed between the three authorities. And he also acknowledged the pain on both sides and said that to reject the pain on both sides would be a mistake, but believes that a wide agreement can be reached. As you said, he set out these 5 principles as a basis for negotiations and called on the Constitution, Justice and Law Committee chair not to bring the law to the first reading before these issues have been resolved. Now, former Defence Minister Gantz was the first to respond and call to real dialogue. Then opposition leader Yair Lapid said that he backs Herzog's proposal, but that the government must immediately halt what he described as an overhaul. Meanwhile, Israeli media reported that the bills will be advanced from the committee on Monday, but that the government will wait 1 week before bringing them to a vote in the Knesset plenum. Now, literally, as we're speaking now, the committee is starting to convene behind me. They're going to be looking at the first of these various judicial reform bills. The government says that they've divided the judicial reform plan into separate bills to enable discussions on each clause. The opposition says that that move was to weaken opposition to the plans.
Right, and Jody, with the public protests and demonstrations still continuing, what is likely to happen next?
So we know that the head of the opposition parties, they're going to be making a statement in the Knesset on Monday. We also know from a poll over the weekend, 62% of the Israeli public wants to halt or delay this process. We know that there's going to be big protests going on across Jerusalem, ending up at the Knesset, at the parliament, at around midday today. We also saw weekend protests for the 6th weekend running across the country, and this included for the first time right-wing communities such as the settlement of Efrat. Prime Minister Netanyahu has indicated that he would be open to counter-offers. The government suggests that these bills would rebalance the power between the government, parliament and judiciary, which they say took too much power in the 1990s. The bills will restore democracy, according to the government. According to the opposition, the bills would harm democracy.
Right, Jody, thank you very much for bringing us the latest details coming out of Israel. WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.